In these rather complicated times, we're all in need of positive thinking. And yet the term has been so abused in the last 25 years, it seems worthwhile to devote some time to trying to clarify basic values. We know, for example, that a kind of attitude, a sort of self-hypnosis, in which the individual, surrounded by his troubles and unable to solve any of them, tries to take an attitude of everything being all right, this does not work. The person, knowing in himself that his optimism is not founded upon anything basic, lacks the courage of conviction and lacks the ability to believe his own constructive affirmation. It is obvious, therefore, that he has to dig deeper to find the basis or level or foundation upon which to build optimism. Some take the attitude that the more we know, the more we understand. This also is a mixed blessing, because experience shows us that increase of knowledge frequently brings with it an increasing ability to estimate difficulties on the level of recognizing more problems than the thoughtless person or the uninformed person ever has to face. If we are serious, if we are students of world affairs, if we have a certain ability to project existing patterns into the future toward their reasonable conclusions, we may also have considerable difficulty in maintaining a positive attitude. It is very easy to take the ground that things are bad, that we can reasonably and rationally expect the worst, and from such thinking we certainly do not come to personal comfort. So mere increase of knowledge or increase of thoughtfulness will not balance the symptomologies that we see around us in the world. So again we have to search elsewhere for the foundation of personal security. And perhaps the seat of it, as in most cases with our complex psychological organization, lies in our emotions. The individual who is emotionally constructive is generally constructive on all other levels. The emotions are the mainspring of our attitudes. And the mind, because it is forever attempting to justify the emotions, will rationalize according to them. So we may say definitely that the potential of a constructive attitude lies deep within the total personality of the individual. There are persons who seemingly are born with the power to retain a positive viewpoint on life. These are not the persons who have had the easiest kind of living. Sometimes their burdens are far heavier than those of the pessimist. They are moving, however, from a basic personal position. They are moving from a series of kindly, constructive, creative emotions. They are friendly by nature. They are idealistic. They are tolerant. They are patient. And they are non-critical in their way of thinking. All of these general attitudes together will add up to a more positive approach to life. Now we may say that if an attitude rises from the emotions, it is not demonstrable That is, we cannot prove it. Perhaps we will be termed foolish. Perhaps we will be regarded as blind to the possibility of worry. This type of blindness offends our friends because they all feel that a responsible person should be miserable. And if we do not take on the general miasma of the time, then we are irresponsible. Actually, a positive attitude can no more be defined than human affections can be defined. We know that love is a reality, but the moment we analyze it, it evaporates. It has to be accepted as a total way of life. The individual who loves well, by instinct, not by attained powers, who has a naturally lovable way with them, will also usually be a constructive thinker and will hold a constructive attitude toward personal circumstances. One of the greatest dangers that we have, which forever interferes with constructive thinking, is self-centeredness. The individual whose mind is constantly focused upon society only in terms of himself will generally find difficulty. Not because, perhaps, the society in which he lives is difficult, but because he is establishing a relationship with society. The total personality which we have as a result of all of our psychic overtones either bestows or demands. And if this total personality demands, we will have trouble. If it bestows, we have a much greater probability of personal happiness. Happiness is something, therefore, which has to be given. The person who possesses it can have more. The person who does not possess it will lose whatever fragments of it seem to belong to him. It is like one of the treasures mentioned in the Bible, that those who have little, from them is taken that which they have. And this is true of peace of mind. The less we have, the more vulnerable we are to lose those few landmarks that we are clinging to. Thus we recognize that society applauds and appreciates the individual who gives something, not necessarily of what he has, but of what he is as a person. The individual can give of graciousness, and graciousness overcomes countless obstacles which would otherwise be baffling and discouraging. The individual can give of patience, and by so doing can very often reduce the pressure of obstacles. The individual can give of thoughtfulness or of consideration for those around them. Such an individual is rewarded by a different attitude from these other people. Constructive thinking, therefore, must begin within the person, and if it so begins, it will be observed as reacting upon that person benevolently. Society is a kind of mirror in which each one of us sees our own natures and temperaments reflected. When we make a grimace at someone else, society grimaces back at us, or seems to do so. And nearly always, the person who has had what we might term disillusioning experiences is a person who has not given very much of their own inner security. They have not had it to give. Now, there is a great deal of difference between giving of what we are and what we have. And there are persons who have given a tremendous amount of certain kinds of specialized thought and emotion, who apparently have not only not been rewarded, but have been penalized. So we have these folks who have done their duties carefully, honestly, sincerely for years, and are miserable. They cannot understand why their sincere and conscientious effort to help other people has not given them greater happiness themselves. We have these folks all the time coming in with their problems, and immediately we recognize one quality that they have in common, namely that they do not personally radiate any kind of positive or optimistic tempo or vibration. They are sad, depressed, frustrated, discouraged, forlorn, and embittered. All these things because what they believe to be their kindly deeds have either been repulsed or not appreciated. Actually, the trouble lay in this psychochemical foundation. There are some persons who, no matter how much good they do, will always do it badly. They have a positive genius for trying to help others, and in the end are disliked and objected to. There is almost always, however, a reason for this. And this reason lies in the spirit behind the deed. The spirit was too heavy. It rumbled and rolled along until people grew very weary of being helped or being encouraged by someone who never showed encouragement themselves. This heavy way of doing things, this dismal, dutiful way, this way sometimes intensified by a powerful psychic drive, which did not represent kindness, but force. This forceful service of others is nearly always rejected in the end. The person cannot win that way. Perhaps the most common and needed of all commodities in our civilization is a kindly smile. Someone who really has a little internal positive libido to radiate. They may not do anything, but if they have the right attitude in themselves, their very presence is a blessing and a benediction. These people do not find this world too bad because they simply do not accept a kind of world that is different from themselves. If we take this as the basis of constructive attitude, it is no longer a platitude or an affirmation. It is no longer a desperate effort to seem happy while miserable. It is a simple discovery of values that have been known to be there from the beginning. Sometimes if we look back through the years towards childhood, we can see how this particular emotion acts and how it develops. We know that there are periods in life, in the life of each person, when they had some comparative happiness. They looked forward optimistically and hopefully to a world ahead. It was romantic and roseate and full of charm and promise. This person may be living in us. A person who ruled us 20 years ago has slowly disappeared from our conscious thinking. And yet, this person and the world in which that person lived still exists. But we have drifted toward disillusionment and embitterment and have lost contact with this kindly optimism which we once possessed. We look back and we may say we were pretty foolish in those days to see everything so wonderful, when in reality it was not wonderful at all. We are pretty foolish in these days to look around us and see everything terrible when things probably are not really that bad at all. But we associate maturity with disillusionment and disenchantment, and sort of feel that as we grow older, we must be just a little bit sad and disillusioned in order to measure our years. Actually, maturity and disillusionment are not synonyms. Maturity should bring with it a powerful power or means of appreciation. It should give us much more to live for and much more to live with than is possible in childhood. Yet so often, as we go along, we are embittered by the experiences of living. Once we are embittered, once we become psychologically negative, it becomes a pernicious habit, extremely difficult to break. Each time we fall into one of these negative moods, everything around us seems to prove that we are justified. And thus we continue to build, accumulating more and more evidence to sustain our loss of optimism and constructive thinking. Thus we have to go back to the emotional coloring which makes life valuable or non-valuable, according to the way in which we use this power of creating overtones around the things about us. We begin, therefore, as we have noted on other occasions, with a factual statement about circumstances. Man is born, man lives, man suffers, and man dies. That is a perfectly natural, sequential formula. And in the face of it, nearly anyone will fall on his face. It becomes a completely meaningless, purposeless statement. Yet no one can deny that it is true. No one can deny that this pattern of living which we know is identical, and that hundreds of millions of persons are passing through the same major incidents. These incidents are colored and are changed by time and place and nation and race, religion, and all these various modifying factors. But basically, the formula is not only extremely simple, but utterly unlivable. So the person facing this formula and being a real, practical, realistic individual lives a hopelessly dull, mediocre, purposeless existence. Now, the human being just cannot live that way. So he has to immediately leave this extreme realism and drift toward some emotional reaction. Emotions step in. The thing as it is, which is a highly neutral thing, must either be good or bad. And it is emotion that determines goodness and badness. It is the mind that determines rightness and wrongness. But the emotions must simply react. And they react to that which is good as pleasure, and to that which is not good as misery. And therefore they begin to weave an elaborate structure of overtones or undertones around every circumstance relating to life. We live in this mass of overtones, these garlandarios with which we deck everything. We never leave the stone as it is. We grow ivy on it, or we do something. And consequently, our lives become completely keyed to our ability to create overtones or our disability in the creation of negative undertones. All passing through the same essential experiences, we must realize that in the world at one time all moods, all emotions, all attitudes exist. Even today, in countries in which, according to our way of thinking, things are pretty desperate, even in these countries, people laugh and smile and hope and build and dream. Some even have the courage to live well, even under most trying and oppressing conditions. The fact that we live in a free country does not make us happy. The fact that we live under a totalitarian despotism does not make us unhappy. We remain what we are. For depending upon what we are, we build a small world of overtones or undertones around us. And in this world we live. Now this world has to be ours, and it is also the only world in which we can live. And through the course of years, we either prove our optimism or prove our pessimism. Once having started with a basic concept, we go on with it. If our natural inclination is to look for good, we will find it in the worst of circumstances. And if our natural inclination is to look for bad, we will find it in the best of circumstances. And the most discontented and miserable people in the world are those who have practically no cause to complain against anything. Recognizing, therefore, the tremendous importance of our own ability to create overtones, we also come face to face with the even more difficult problem of trying to change basic attitudes somewhere in the midstream of living. This is, of course, difficult because we have created habit mechanisms. And an attitude is just as habit-forming as any narcotic. To change the attitude, therefore, we have to use a great deal of effort. We have to use a great deal of resolution, determination, and we have to place ourselves under a strong personal discipline. To do this is useless to attempt merely to demand the change of overtones. We cannot look out at a world that we have regarded dismally for 50 years and suddenly and brightly announce that it looks wonderful. We are not even fooling ourselves. We are not fooling anything or anyone. Nor can we, in a moment of almost hysterical dedication, suddenly dash out and try to change this world, because we are not equipped to do it, and we will only multiply our own misgivings and discouragements by the reaction that we will receive. Yet the situation has to be changed in some way. Always remembering that the light by which we see is a light inside and not a light on the outside of life. We have to know how to refocus our own ability to understand and accept things. Now, occasionally we have a good example of how this can happen. A lonely, tired, disillusioned person, basically, however, possessing the capacity for happiness, but perhaps a little frustrated by passing circumstances, has a change come in their living. They find someone who cares for them. And in this tremendous experience of creating a new home and starting out on a new approach to living, this pessimism is broken by a new series of patterns, and the individual emerges as the happier person that they potentially were capable of being. Therefore, sometimes, if the ability to be happy is fairly well present, incidents or circumstances can contribute to its expression. On the other hand, another person of the same mind, but without this basic capacity to be happy, also forms a fortunate friendship or emotional alliance and also creates a home and proceeds to settle down and wreck it, never ceasing to be the same old pessimistic self. No matter how many good things come to that individual, they can write them away. They can disparage and destroy them, leaving nothing but personal misery, not only for themselves but others. Thus it is this internal power to be happy that has to be sought for and cultivated. If the person simply does not possess it, he must begin as he would begin in childhood and try to build it. Try desperately to find the seed of it within his own nature, because actually man contains within himself the seed of everything. There is no condition in space that man does not have or does not possess within himself a likeness toward which he can develop. But perhaps the happiness seed, as the Chinese call it, has not yet even sprouted. It has been allowed to be stopped and blocked by weeds growing in a negative garden of attitudes. Weeds which have prevented this good plant from ever having a chance. Yet the happiness seed is at the root of the tree of immortality. For upon this tree, if it is allowed to grow, are focused all the wonderful constructive values and attitudes which make life beautiful and wonderful. If the seed is there, then it has to be watered and it has to be given sunshine, and the garden has to be weeded. And this brings us, more or less psychologically, to a pattern which I think is worth remembering, although perhaps some of the psychologists are not in full agreement about it. The question remains as to whether the seed of happiness can actually be made to grow, or whether it will grow if the condition which it needs is available. The general attitude seems to be that the important thing is to get rid of the weeds that prevent it from growing. That in nature, anything that has an opportunity will grow. And nature shows us that it can adjust magnificently to incredible circumstances. The mere fact that that conditions are not ideal will not stop nature. Nature will do anything possible and often creates its own possibilities. Therefore, if the happiness seed does not grow in the individual, it is because the pressures against it or the circumstances make this growth impossible in nature. If man, therefore, will remove impossible obstacles, or will take away things which completely prevent the appearance of his own inner contentment, it will probably develop of itself. So the psychologist recommends that we weed the garden of discontent, that we make a positive campaign to get rid of these devil weeds that are ruining our otherwise suitable psychic front yard. To do this, we have to begin to distinguish between a weed and a flower. Many an enthusiastic gardener, in order to cleanse and prepare his land, has gone out and carefully pulled up all the flowers instead of the weeds. This is not successful either, except for the weeds. Each one of us has to weed the garden. And to weed it, we have to get rid of a whole circle of negative conclusions. And they're hard to get rid of because we seem to be able to prove them. And when we are faced by what looks very much like a fact, it is difficult for the individual to admit that he could be wrong. He knows that he has had a certain kind of life. He knows that he has lived it a certain way, and it has always caused him grief and trouble. Most of all, he is suffering from the illusion that he has lived a good life, and therefore that it has to be other people's fault. Well, we can live a good life and live it so obnoxiously that no one else can stand it. So a good life is never a really good life unless it is a gracious life. A life gently and beautifully lived. No amount of dedication can compensate for a certain amount of sensitivity, of ability to understand and to recognize the rights, relations, proprieties of other people. In our desperate desire to be understood, we do not give sufficient effort to understanding life and those around us. So we have to begin to recognize that if we had really lived a good life, we would not be miserable people, because goodness is not rewarded with misery. There has to be something wrong. Yet around us we can see where that appears to be the case beyond doubt. This has to be due to a circumstance, that this goodness is not moved from within us by a strong enough psychic energy. It is an attitude. It is a moral duty. It is a theological virtue. It is a traditional piety. But it is not goodness. It is something that has been cultivated in some way. It is something perhaps that we have used as a means of justifying our own existence. This goodness is some way mixed up with self-interest, self-seeking, self-pity, selfishness. It is not a pure and natural emotion, or it would not result in trouble. There are a few persons who probably would never respond to anything that anyone else did. But for the most part, a truly gracious life is irresistible. So something has to be wrong where it does not appear to work out. And of course, working with people, as much as I have, I think I've seen what is wrong. And I've seen it repeated so often that one cannot ignore the symptoms. In the first place, the individual who feels righteously indignant or discouraged is no longer in a position to analyze himself, or at least not until he begins to change his own habits. He is so negative and is clinging so desperately to the shadow of his own virtue that he has no way of getting a perspective on the difficulties which surround him. He will tell you, of course, that he is sad and depressed and miserable now because of what has happened to him. But if you go back and examine family records, or if you talk to his friends or his old acquaintances, they will most likely tell you that he was always that way. He likes to believe that he has been embittered, but actually he started embittered. And life was just a process of proving to him that he was right. And he must prove that he is right. That is part of the way of human nature. Now, it is, of course, occasionally true that a great tragedy will embitter or disillusion a person. But as strange as it may seem, the chances are better than 50-50 that a great tragedy will do a tremendous amount of positive work. Some of the most beautiful and best adjusted Constructive thinkers are the ones who have gone through what we would term a terrible calamity. It has not anything much to do with what happens. It is always the individual's own reaction that determines his integrity and his adjustment. So recognizing the need for re-evaluation and realizing that he cannot have a constructive attitude until he believes it. He must find ways to convince himself of the fact. Now, of course, there are many traditional ways. Religion has done it for a great many people. Philosophy has done it. Art, music, literature, avocations, interesting and important personal incidents. All these things have helped. But they have generally helped most when the individual was most receptive to them. And against a completely locked attitude, none of these will help a great deal. But in every instance, the help must be upon the level of feeling. The individual, to be better, must feel better, and to feel better must be better. This is a very close interlocking arrangement. And the negative statement is just as interlocking, because each emotion reacts to create more of its own kind. And we have what the Buddhists call the Wheel of Dharma, turning constantly upon its ancient axis. And this axis, of course, is the will or energy field upon which all human psychic life turns. In trying to understand this problem, then, we, of course, can always build best upon something we already possess. And it is not too common to find a person who is completely devoid of all optimism. There is usually some hope, some stray conviction that things could be better. And these basic values that still remain must be developed and strengthened in every way possible. Perhaps we should look upon life as a kind of laboratory, and that by experimentation we can best prove things. The only way we can convince ourselves of the value of an action is first to perform that action and estimate its consequences. If we are inclined to be a little bit lonesome and friendless, if things are pretty drab, not too optimistic on most levels, then action, and action alone, will give us a new perspective if this action is conscientiously and earnestly endeavored. So perhaps one of the simplest things to do is to prove that a day can be better by taking a brief but intensive attitude toward that day. The individual can try desperately to meet the day with a smile instead of a sigh. And before the day is out, if this attitude is maintained, something can be proven. The individual will find that the smile that he has will return to him. The people that have looked at him glumly will smile back if he smiles. He will also find that a certain amount of charm and courtesy will be similarly rewarded. Occasionally there will be an exception. But taking all in all, an improved attitude will make a marked change in the day. It will give the individual the evidence that he needs that a more constructive approach to living will be met in most cases. And it will certainly usually be met by those near to us who are hoping that such a situation will come to pass. If, however, we have long had negative attitudes, our first smile may not be trusted. In fact, the other individual involved may be too shocked to react. They have come to the conclusion that we are frozen in our distemper. They may not believe it. But if it persists for a while, their attitude will also change because it exists only within themselves. And if the evidence that sustains it disappears, the attitude will disappear. So if we are not able within 24 hours to convince the world that we are a new person, we should not be perturbed by that, because we had perhaps spent 20 years convincing them that we were not a desirable person. So it might take 6 months to reverse this decision. But if we are consistent, and if our attitude gains more and more momentum within ourselves, we can finally not only convince them, but give them a sense of admiration to us, because perhaps they then see us making improvements which they would also like to make in themselves. By changing ourselves, we become an inspiration to others. Whereas by trying to change others, we only become a nuisance. And we set the best lesson, and we teach the most when we prove that we can rise above our own limitations and thus indicate that others can do the same. So we can make a gradual experiment, cautiously, scientifically, to prove conclusively that a better approach to life is really a statement of value, a statement of things as they are. Now, behind all of this lies also a large philosophical position. You look around you at the earth and the sky and the oceans and the rivers, the mountains, and you will realize that nature has not decreed, predestined, and foreordained that creatures be miserable. Nature has not said that we should actually be born in misery and die in pain. Man himself is largely responsible for the intensification of living situations. Man has gradually departed from ways of nature, departed from the natural processes of living, and has created this involved human situation in which war, crime, poverty, sickness, and death have become more or less rulers over the mortal world. This is not nature's way, nor is it something that has to be. It is something that human beings have tolerated, and which has gradually caused an acidity within themselves until they have become disillusioned and depressed, and are perfectly willing to assume that the worst must be true. And because nature has not decreed such things, it is not inevitable that man must act as he does, nor react as he does to the situations around him. It is perfectly possible for the human being to look around him, both in society and nature, and find legitimate reasons for optimism. Truly, every generation has assumed that it is the most miserable and crisis-ridden of all time. Yet it is not essentially true. Each generation has in it much that is good and much that is wonderful. And a more constructive attitude on the part of collective humanity could transform this world very rapidly. It is just the fact that everyone settles down to being sorry for himself and carefully remembers his miseries and carefully forgets the joys and good times which he has enjoyed. This emphasis upon negation is perhaps due to a basic psychological quality in human nature. Man has a strange inferiority complex because he is always inevitably reacting to everything as a frustrated godling of some kind. Man has never been willing to accept his own humanity. He has insisted upon being divinity in exile. Therefore, he is like the house of Bourbon in France, a house of kings who have no throne and simply cannot mingle themselves with the proletariat. The human being has taken the attitude that in some way he is superior to nature, and he is unhappy, he is frustrated, he is depressed by the fact that he has to obey rules when he feels he should be creating them instead. And out of this strange, deep frustration in his own soul was born the spirit of rebellion that has been present or noted in scriptural writings since the beginning of time. The human being does not adjust easily. He does not accept happily. He is a highly competitive creature. And instead of rejoicing at the common good, he believes that he can rejoice only when some particular good comes to him. As long as he allows these instincts to dominate him, he is really reacting to atavistic trends and pressures. He is not growing as he should. He is not becoming the kind of person the world needs at this critical time. To build, therefore, a deep basis for a better attitude and a justification for constructive thinking, we have to get down underneath all this. Get beneath the rubble of this superstructure. Get down again to the basic values that create living. And each person has to recover from the hope, the rather blind hope, that something fortuitous is going to accomplish the desired end. Persons have drifted for an entire lifetime waiting for some happy incident to bring happiness to them. They are convinced that if they could have certain things they do not have, if they could get rid of certain things they do have, happiness would result. And once they were happy, once things were the way they should be, then the constructive attitude would blossom like a rose, and all would be well. Many times, happiness and constructive thinking is therefore suspended from some point of view, placed or posited in a certain detail of action. So the individual will say to you, if I only could add another room to my house, I would be completely happy. 5 rooms later, and they're still miserable. Doesn't do a thing. Another individual says, if I could just have that new car, I'd be completely happy. The new car is a tremendous thrill for 2 weeks, and then the individual has to trade it in at the loss of $2,000. Then the new car becomes a burden, because we don't know how soon to trade it in and how much loss to take. Another person will say, if only my daughter will not marry that particular man, any man but him. Actually, the answer is, as long as she doesn't marry any man, period, Mama will be happy. So daughter does not. What is the result? Mama is still unhappy, and now daughter is unhappy too. Magnificent achievement. The trouble has been compounded. Another individual will say, I've not been well. If I only had my health, I'd be happy. So with great trouble, problems, striving, health is attained. No happiness. Now the individual is miserable because they no longer got all the attention they got while they were sick. This problem of anything that happens to us, guaranteeing that we will change our basic outlook, is fortuitous thinking. It is not based upon any solid experience of the race. So no matter how hard we try to make people happy by doing the things they want to have done, they're still miserable. And usually now we are miserable also. Because sometimes people demand most unreasonable things in the name of happiness. All of the experience of the race then points distinctly toward this subtle capacity, this basic ability to be well integrated or well oriented. And then even if there is a serious shock, and perhaps under some very specific provocation, this optimism is lost, it can be rather easily regained. Psychologically speaking, the individual is a good risk for recovery. He will get over it, because our temperaments are decided largely in childhood. And the individual who is born with an optimistic nature and lives with it until they're 18 or 20 years old, and then perhaps runs into a period of rough sailing in life, loses some of it, becomes a little discouraged, and at 40 seeks help. This individual has a very good chance for almost immediate reorientation, because the basic situation was well established. This person will recover and go on. It is the basic temperament that counts. And you can tell very frequently in a small child just about how it's going to be. There are children that are incorrigible at 2 years of age. There are children who are so willful at 3 that no ordinary discipline can touch them. There are others who are obviously self-centered and introverted almost from the day of birth. And then by the time they reach 6 or 7 years old, they have become confirmed little schemers, trying by every means conceivable to get their own way in everything. These children at this age have shown the tendency, which has, had it been worked with immediately, might have been rather easily corrected. But this tendency going on is obscured at first by school, obscured by romance, obscured by all the inevitable energies of youth and the privileges that youth receives. We forgive youth almost everything. But by the time life reaches its maturity, these scheming, pressureful, intense, stubborn, willful persons begin to find life closing in on them. Then miseries start, and they do not know why. Yet if these persons will look back, they will see that they were neurotic children, that they were always misfits, and therefore have no right to blame society for their condition. They seem to have brought it with them out of some previous life. This crying, pressing need for the reintegration of themselves. The moment they realize this, they should try to do something about it. Try to find ways to meet this situation with basic change of attitude. Now, for these folks simply to drift into some optimistic circle of individuals constantly affirming the gloriousness of everything won't do it, because it does not go inside far enough. These people will join various religious movements, and in 6 months they're disillusioned at the organizations. They have carried their criticism with them, and there's the old story, you know, about one of them finally arriving at the gates of heaven. And St. Peter asked them what they wanted, and they said they wanted to come in. St. Peter looked in the book a long lifetime of negation, of negativeness, of bickering, but no very bad crimes, just the crime of always being unhappy. So St. Peter said to this soul, said, all right, go on in if you want to, but you won't like it. And that is exactly the situation that we face. No matter what condition comes along, they won't like it. Simply because the temperament is keyed to this. And the only way is for the person to take it in hand himself. He's got to try to understand values. Now, about individuals who have these situations, there are usually certain notable peculiarities. One is that they have too much leisure. One of the reasons why they have too much leisure is because they have no friends. They have no life of their own, or a very restricted one. They have too much time on their hands, and they're using it to think about themselves. Nearly all poor living is self-centered living. The individual who has nothing more important to think about than himself has nothing important to think about. He is making a very dangerous negative decision in permitting himself such an attitude. Now, we can't simply tell anyone, forget yourself. This kind of a platitude is meaningless. But we can do what others have found successful, and that is we can suggest that these individuals also think about something else. You cannot tell a person to stop thinking, nor can you give him a negative and expect him to build something positive upon it. There is no use saying to him, thou shalt not. The thing you must do is try to find something that he shall do, and do as quickly as possible. And this generally means to create a counteracting or autocompensatory interest. If this person can be lured into taking an interest in anything, it will divide the amount of time they have in which to be sorry for themselves. The more you can divide that time until less and less of it is available for self-pity, the more rapidly you can help that person, or that person can help himself. So we have strong recommendations of release through taking an interest in something. I know one individual told me that they had this kind of a problem of not having much to live for. And I asked them if they had any interest. And the individual said, oh yes, I am very much interested in myself. Well, obviously. But not constructively. Because all this self-interest led to nothing. It was not the analytical type of self-interest that sought to find ways of self-improvement. It was just the utter, complete fascination of self. To that individual, nothing was more interesting than himself. And to everyone else, nothing was less interesting. The problem then of dividing negative attitudes and reducing their strength often means a great deal. It can sometimes be accomplished by introducing into the life of a person who has too much leisure some form of self-expression through music, art, literature, drama, anything that will cause this person to come into a more or less community existence, come into a kind of competitive role in which they could excel in something to the amazement of others and also of their own amazement. So that if we can divide a negative attitude, we weaken it. If we can then divide that one again, we weaken the whole situation more. And out of the problem comes a degree of positive attitude, because the positive attitude is released to the degree that we can break down this eternal negative pressure. If we can find some way, then, of giving these people outlets through crafts or trades or anything, so that their hands and minds are occupied. I know one individual who, under the pressure of this situation, I suggested that they find some kind of an avocation. They took up knitting. And when I asked why they selected knitting, they said they could do it without thinking and could still spend their mind energy on themselves. They'll outwit you every time if they can. Because there is a strange, almost intoxicating delight that comes from being terribly sorry for yourself. It is a sort of a cozy feeling. A kind of nostalgia goes with it that is comforting in a small way. But when we realize how it comes back at us from every direction as misery, we simply cannot tolerate it. So whatever the activity is, it must involve the mind. That's why long walks won't help unless the person has gone out with an interest. If he goes out as a botanist, or if he goes out to study some phase of nature, then it will help him. But just to walk around and think about himself, he may as well sit home and think about himself. This problem of finding a release from this self-focus. Reading helps. Because reading is often a release. But these neurotic folks have an unfortunate tendency of reading themselves into everything they read. When they read fiction, they identify themselves with the sufferer in the story, whoever it may be. If they read philosophy, you can be certain that they will pick every critical point and try to make it fit their own case. The worst problem for these folks is psychological reading, because they can always begin to diagnose themselves. And as they are not fair, they are not honest in themselves, or they wouldn't be in the situation, they cannot make an honest diagnosis of themselves. So the problem locks itself constantly. Everything seems to conspire against the individual breaking through this circle of intensity, a circle which limits him completely unless he is strong enough and skillful enough to break through it. Recognizing the basic factor that he has to push by means of his emotions, that he has to have some kind of an emotional experience. Perhaps one of his keys is to become a little more observant of the situations around him, trying to see if he can pick some incident or some circumstance that will strengthen his own emotional resolution to do something. Normally speaking, religion helps. But usually it is not the kind of religion that is pointed directly at that problem. There are a great many peace, power, and plenty cults that do not help, whereas sometimes a comparatively conservative, old-fashioned religion does much more. It depends entirely on the individual, of course, but you cannot attack this problem frontally. You cannot go and take lessons in constructive thinking and be sure you have it beaten. It is much better to get lessons in kindly reaction to life in total. And sometimes this comes through the archetypal form of a strengthening faith. The individual who begins to believe that God is in his universe, begins to believe that there is good in his fellow man, begins to believe that there are values above those of personal attitudes. This general, broad believing has a great deal more virtue for the troubled heart or troubled mind. the individual is very often conditioned by early living to a religious belief of some kind. And this is going to be a problem 50 years from now, because the younger generation is not nearly as strongly set in its religious convictions, and therefore this leverage may not be available at that time. We hope other leverage will take its place, because the definite need for some kind of anchorage certainly does remain in human nature. But having a belief lurking in the background, this belief may be vitalized and can often be used to carry the person across into a better way of thinking and feeling. It is not a rational problem, essentially, because most of the problems we suffer from are not rational. If they were reasonable problems, we could solve them. It is the unreasonable problem that is always the disaster. And it is unreasonable because it is unreasonable that that thing should be a problem. We have taken something which could not be a normal problem, because all normal problems can be solved. But when we manufacture a false problem, intensifying it only with imagination, sustaining it only with our own psychic energy, neither ourselves nor anyone else can apply a solution to it, because it is not a solvable problem. It is not a pattern. It is not a reality. If we have a visible enemy, we can build defenses against him. But when this enemy has no dimensions except our own imagining, he can come through any keyhole. And that is what happens psychologically. There is no way of defending ourselves against a false problem, because it has no dimensions. It has no factual form. If then we are burdened with this kind of problem, we have to break down the habit of creating them. We have to find ways to restore a more constructive, basic reality in our natures. Now, the Greeks and also Oriental peoples have given us one formula which can be very useful and very constructive, and that is to remind the person that the more self-centered he becomes, the less truly conscious he is of self. This is a strange contradiction, but self-centeredness always centers upon the objective personality, always centers upon mind, emotion, notion, thought, attitude, belief, and any one of the negative pressures that we develop. True self-consciousness is the consciousness of the divine self in man. And this type is not what causes the trouble. So all these ancient peoples developed a certain contemplative exercise in which the individual attempted to create a new habit. The purpose of concentration or meditation is to create new habits. To create a habit by intention rather than by accident. And also based strongly upon the fact that man is a scattered being, his thoughts and emotions racing around with little, if any, discipline. That with a comparatively small amount of disciplined effort, the individual can neutralize negative habits, because he can learn a great deal and achieve a great deal by organized efforts. We often hear in politics how an organized minority can overwhelm an unorganized majority. And this applies to the habit patterns and thought expressions of the individual. Dr. Eliot of Harvard, of course, was authority for the idea that if you would spend 15 minutes a day in the study of any subject, the end of 2 years, you'd be an authority. Because very few people spend 15 minutes a day thinking about anything with continuity and with continuance of purpose once they've graduated from school. So that the individual who does give disciplined continuity of attention to any subject can become proficient in it, assuming that it is not totally beyond his capacity. So the concentrative and contemplative exercises of the ancients consisted in devoting a few minutes every day to genuine, honest, impersonal, unselfish self-analysis. Assuming, of course, that it won't be a total picture to begin with. It won't be without selfishness. It won't be totally impersonal when we start. But it will be just a little better than our undisciplined, non-thoughtful attitudes that we have been using the rest of the time. So the individual can begin to sit down and analyze his own life. He can look back over the day and try for the first time to be truly honest. When he says honest, I don't mean that he hasn't cheated somebody out of something. I mean the kind of honesty which must determine whether he has cheated himself out of happiness. When he goes back over that day, he must honestly try to estimate whether he did certain things reasonably well. Did he have a constructive attitude toward the day? Did he face the problems of the day naturally and simply? Did he make a mountain out of every duty? Did he arm himself and argue with himself before he did those simple and natural things that everyone has to do? Did he gracefully move through such patterns as were his proper responsibilities? Or did he hold all kinds of mental reservations that took small patterns and made them tremendous? Did he realize that the greatest part of a piece of work is anticipation or regret? That it is not the doing of the thing, it is the getting ready to get started, to begin to commence doing the thing. And by the time we build all this and get ourselves into a tremendous fixation over it, we have made a great job out of a small one. And we always do that when we have only small jobs. If we have great jobs, we can't afford such leisure of energy. Having done it, do we then proceed to regret the necessity of having to do it, be sorry for ourselves, wish we had someone else to do it for us, and proceed to examine and find out why we are the most miserable of mortals because we had to do it? So around a piece of work that might take anywhere from 5 minutes to 15 minutes or an hour has been built several hours of overtones and undertones. Tremendous values of no value have been added, and the simple problem has become a great undertaking. Quietly sitting in concentration at the end of the day, think these things through. Find out how much energy you expended in the job and how much more you expended in regretting the job. Try to find out why you regretted it. Try to analyze your basic motives for the resentments against things that might be quite normal and proper. Try to understand why your neighbor down the street doing the same thing was not regretting it. I asked one person that once, and he said, well, obviously, too stupid. You can't break through this pattern. The individual always has the answer. The neighbor was too stupid to be unhappy about it. And because we were big and smart about it, we were miserable. This kind of thinking always locks itself. But quietly, with no one around, we can frequently sit down and think back through the day and gradually perceive a little of the machinery of our own conduct. The moment we actually see a mistake, we have 3/4 corrected it. The moment we say to ourselves, I guess I was pretty foolish, right in that moment, heaven comes closer. The individual has made one of the basic discoveries of life, namely that we can all be foolish. We have a gift for it, a knack. The moment we can begin to realize that we did not have to have these situations, but chose them, and acted so that no other situations could arise, we sit down and take this into disciplined thought. And in 10 minutes or 15 minutes at the most of quietude, we can go through a great deal of the day. We can carefully estimate what we said during the argument. We can try to find out why we had the argument, and who was really to blame. Was it the other person, as we immediately concluded? Or when we look back, did we say the first bitter word? Did we set a situation that caused irritation and contention? And if we can gradually begin to clarify this, little by little, a pattern will emerge. And a simple process of this kind, carried on every day for 6 months, and done honestly, will begin to establish autocorrective mechanisms within ourselves. In the first few weeks, there will be no visible result. We'll be in the process of amazement and digestion. It will be a new universe, because we have been looking out at other people, and we have never watched ourselves go by and see how we looked. But by concentration, we can detach ourselves from ourselves and have that wonderful separate look. In so doing, we can then also understand why people do not accept us 100%. As we look at ourselves impartially, it gets a little difficult for us to accept ourselves. We are not the person we thought we were. We are not that poor martyr to everyone else's opinions. We are very much inclined to be rather difficult and pesky creatures, with only one precise interest, and that is to have our own ways regardless of consequences. As this begins to show, the person can say, well, I guess there's a reason why I haven't got any friends. I've never been a friend, really. I've done all kinds of things for people. And when the neighbor's sick, I rushed in with a half a dozen eggs. But I had a look on my face at the time which indicated that I was afraid I wasn't going to get them back. All of these things gradually come into the picture. We begin to see all the silly little reasons why we think we're doing nice things for people. But the really nice thing we do not do. And that is the simple giving of our own understanding and our basic concern for their happiness, rather than what they can do to make us happy. Studying this every day for a few months, we begin to find it come out. The individual instinctively stops for some reason just before the next argument. He is reminded of what he has learned about himself. He is creating an association mechanism, and his self-knowledge is beginning to affect his conduct. And in 6 months, self-knowledge can improve his conduct 100% over what it was before. He was not striving for perfection. We are simply striving for sufficiency, that condition which is reasonable to the need of the hour. By thus gradually becoming convinced about ourselves by ourselves, we have the only experience that is valid to man. The words of our friends and neighbors, the advice and counsel of our minister, and even the words of our scriptures are not valid when compared to the personal experience of a fact. And one of the powers that mind and memory give us is the power to relive or re-experience a fact. And through mental procedure we can do this. And in this way we can get a new emotional reaction that we were too busy and too indifferent to note at the time of the first occurrence. But as we consider our own conduct critically in the reliving of the incident, with now, of course, no other person present, no other circumstance to add artificial pressures, no longer in a need to defend something, we begin to see the pattern, and something moves up from within ourselves, which is our emotional energy. And this emotional energy says, I don't like me for having done that. Or I think I did better on that occasion. Or I think if I had done it this way instead of the way I did, this unfortunate critical condition could have been avoided. And by degrees, the emotional nature simply comes around to the simple statement, positive or negative, when the estimating of a circumstance arises. The emotional nature, seeing a certain pattern, says, this pleases me. And seeing another pattern says, this does not please me. And actually, before it's said and done, we gain our greatest consolation by pleasing these patterns in ourselves. And if our efforts are not under pressure, if we're not falsely setting up patterns, but are simply quietly reacting to basic patterns, we will find that if we are at all integrated or at all rational beings, that the patterns which please us in quietude and when we are relaxed and not trying to do something, that these patterns are usually true. So we will find that the better things we do please us best. The things that we do that are not better do not please us as well. And we also begin to note the comforts or discomforts reacting from these attitudes. We can begin to pick out a day and say, this day I spoiled for myself. I know it. I got up on the wrong side of the bed that morning. There's just nothing I could do about it. I just was cranky and everything went wrong. The first thing that went wrong is we burned the breakfast, and from there on it got worse. Before the day was done, we wished the day had never existed. But this business of spoiling days for ourselves can stretch out into spoiling lives for ourselves. And it is a mistake to allow this condition to go along, and that a whole life is ruined because we were born and got out of the crib first on the wrong side and never got it corrected. Little by little, we can see the foolishness of our own ways, and these concentrative disciplines, quietly used, not only tell us a great deal about our conduct, but a great deal about ourselves. They are not daydreaming because we are actually re-experiencing something, but we are also releasing, almost as in a very highly constructive daydream, we are giving expression to our own psychic integration. In concentration, because we are quiet, because we are allowing these incidents to drift almost like pictures through our minds, they serve as mandalas, or focal points for the release of our own solutional power. This is the mystery of the wonderful hinder thought we hear about so often, where the individual, having made a very bad situation, goes home and then sits down and figures out how he could have been victorious, how he could have done it wonderfully. But of course it was too late. He had already done it badly. But this reflection upon things is a kind of mandala exercise. And by degrees we can build estimation of true value. And by watching our own conduct, we can observe that when we did things a little better, other people seemed to be better. That when we got up and started the day with a smile, it was a better day. How actually when we did not say the unpleasant thing, or did not rise to the temper fit, or carefully avoided friction, that we were rewarded with greater peace of mind. And that to the degree that we controlled ourselves, we controlled the entire environment in which we lived. This, by degrees, through the actual experience of reliving it, gives us a valid lesson, one that we cannot deny. For just as surely as we cannot deny the experience in the first place which seemed to justify our pessimism, so if we sit down and examine that experience again in the light of a better understanding or a deeper insight, we cannot deny the effect of such a procedure. It will in each instance show us our own mistake. By degrees, this type of reaction becomes the basis of truly constructive thinking, because all constructive thinking must arise from thoughtfulness. Constructive thinking is not accidental, nor is it merely a formula. In order to think constructively, we must know what is constructive in almost any circumstance. There always will be some that are a little beyond us, but there are a great many circumstances that we can control far better than we do. And therefore, there is a lot of happiness that is slipping away from us, wasted by our own carelessness. This process of subjecting ourselves to a laboratory experimentation will not only pay off and pay very well, but it immediately changes the total complexion of our living. This meditational, concentrative revaluation of ourselves will cut our doctor's bills, cut our various sick leaves that we have to take, will give us better friends and a happier family, and very often will actually improve our economic standing, simply because we are more able to do things. If, for instance, we have a task to perform that takes an hour and is distasteful, we worry about it for 2 hours before we do it and regret it for 2 hours afterwards. We have actually given 5 hours to a 1-hour job. And of course, one of our common problems is to dilly-dally through the job simply because we resent it, often taking several times the necessary amount of time on that account. Whereas if we had conserved energy, simply done what was next, we would have had at least 4 out of those 5 hours to do with something else with. This something else could be productive of self-improvement or productive of economic returns. But we have wasted it making mountains out of molehills. And this habit is too costly in these times. So the amount of energy and time devoted to self-examination on that ground pays off. Pays off better than anything else you could do with that time. Pays off in health and happiness and in actual financial security. So there is every inducement in this world for the individual to think things through. There are a lot of unadjusted individuals in business. Some of them are unadjusted and should not be in the lines they're in. Some would be unadjusted in any line, simply because they are unadjusted. Period. You cannot adjust them because they do not want to work. They do not like continuity of effort. They are bored by everything they do. If these individuals will settle down and think, They can do a great deal through a brief period of concentration to integrate their attitude. Now, the problem of concentration is a very simple one. It should be entered into honestly, perhaps with a moment of silent prayer or meditation, asking that insight be given, asking that the total availability of the individual shall be made available through complete relaxation to truth, to the truth of ourselves as we are. No one else is ever going to know this, so we do not have to cheat. We do not have to try to talk ourselves in and out of something, because only person we can ever deceive is ourselves. And having come firmly to this conclusion, very quietly take the day and go back. Don't go back several days or several years. Just stay with the day and see how it could have been a better day, and see the things that you did that made it a better day than it might otherwise have been. See just exactly, as a mental experience, what your motives were. When you got up and made a pronouncement, did you mean it, or you were merely trying to be heard? Did you interrupt because you knew more, or because you wanted to get into the conversation? Were you moved by a desire to help, or a desire simply to impress other people? Quietly examining each of your motives and resolve to cling to those that are right, you will find in one day a number of little, understandable, knowable, useful incidents that are not so big and so remote that you can't do anything about them, and are not so tremendously important that they overwhelm you. They're just little things. And these little things tell you the story of yourself and why you are not able to think constructively when you want to. Having discovered them, analyzed them, thought about them, neither rebuke yourself nor applaud yourself. Simply say, I guess that is the way I am. Now, what are we going to do about it? Don't be so sorry that you are dissolved in penance and never get around to doing anything. Don't be so happy over one achievement that you forget all the mistakes. Take it all in stride. It's you. Good, bad, and indifferent. It's all you. Meet it. And try to make certain that whatever mistake you made is not repeated. And that whatever attitude did not come out well is examined as to why. Not always in terms of other people's reaction, but to understand why you have to be wrong if things go wrong. Either you do not plan properly, or you do not meet the emergency properly, or you misinterpret, or you remember too long. Something is wrong. Studying it in this term gently, without reproach, as you would study an experiment, you are simply learning about yourself. And when you put what you've learned about yourself to work, stimulated by an emotional resolution to do better, you will find that constructive thinking is the natural consequence. And as time is up, I think we'd better stop. Next week, we are going to carry a little further perhaps on this particular line, namely the perilous journey of the soul. What happens when the individual starts looking for himself? Is he able to stand the shock? Is it usually fatal? Or does he survive and come out of it rather the better for it? The perilous journey of the soul is an ancient quotation, and it tells the story of the human being's search for selfhood in its essential nature, and we think it's a valuable and useful subject. In connection with this morning's talk, we recommend our booklets, Right Thinking and Solving Psychic Problems. We hope that you will visit the book table and do some of your Christmas shopping with us, And we are happy to say that the story of Christmas, which we sort of conjured up as a solution to the Christmas card small gift problem of many persons, has been so successful that it is now in a second printing. So that if you are interested in using that, instead of the pair of socks or the handkerchief or the expensive Christmas card that will be relegated to limbo 3 days after New Year's, if you have someone whom you might like to give this to, parts of it could well be read to children on Christmas at the time of their opening of their presents and so on. It, I think, will help to strengthen and deepen Christmas appreciation and value. So we hope that you will consider it on your Christmas shopping list, and also that you will consider subscriptions to our magazine and our books to the more thoughtful and appreciative of your friends. These gifts will have more permanent value than the great mass of knickknacks that are so often acquired, and no one knows what to do with them. So if you are practical thinkers, we hope you will do some of your Christmas shopping at our book table, and we thank you very much for being with us this morning.